In just 5 minutes, a powerful judge tried to silence Jasmine Crockett with a $15,000 fine, no evidence, no hearing, just abused power. But what he didn't expect was that this moment would bring him to the edge of his own downfall. What was supposed to be a routine procedural hearing turned into a high-stakes clash between arrogance and justice. Can a black woman, armed only with the law and courage, shake the system to its core? Stay with us, this is a story worth every second of your time. It was a cold, gray morning in downtown Chicago. Courtroom 2 was scheduled for a simple procedural check, just a routine look at paperwork. But the moment Jasmine Crockett stepped inside, she sensed something was off. A seasoned lawyer and former prosecutor, she had seen enough to recognize when something wasn't right. The silence was heavy. The court staff avoided eye contact. Even the walls felt like they were listening. Judge Harold Kane was already seated, tall, stern, known for pushing rulings through without hearing full arguments. He didn't read files, he issued verdicts. His cold stare followed Jasmine as she walked in. He didn't see her as a lawyer, he saw her as a problem. The courtroom didn't feel tense, it felt controlled. Kane wasn't there for justice. He was there for power. He entered like a force. Didn't pause. Didn't G-lock T anyone. He adjusted his robe in one sharp motion and looked forward with cold, flat eyes. His voice came next, low, clipped, without hesitation. This matter is already clear. The defendant is in violation of Code 22F. The fine is $15,000 to be paid immediately. That is the court's decision. No explanation, no discussion, no process, just a ruling, fast, final, and absolute. Jasmine hadn't spoken. Her files were still closed. Her hands, calm just a moment ago, were now slightly curled, tense, controlled. Even the prosecutor looked confused, shifting in his seat as if he had missed something. He hadn't. No one had. Because nothing had been said, no evidence, no arguments, not even the usual procedural steps. Just a decision. Jasmine was expected to accept it and move on, bruised but quiet. She didn't. She stood halfway from her seat and spoke calmly. Your Honor, with all respect, we haven't even begun. I haven't presented a single argument. Kane's eyes narrowed, not with reconsideration but with irritation. Because none are needed, he snapped. You violated the code. It's not up for debate. His tone wasn't dismissive. It was sharp, meant to shame her. This wasn't a legal error. It was a message. Sit down. Stay quiet. Don't push back. Jasmine didn't flinch. No raised voice, no visible anger. She stood with calm hands folded in front of her. She was composed, though her heart likely pounded beneath her blazer. That control wasn't instinct, it was training. Years as a prosecutor had taught her. When power is misused, restraint becomes your sharpest weapon. She took a breath and spoke with calm force. Your Honor, with full respect, I am formally requesting the opportunity to present my defense. Due process requires that I be heard. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air with precision. It wasn't a request, it was a right. But Kane didn't budge. He looked at her not with fairness, but with hostility. His jaw tightened. Then he leaned forward and said, louder this time, Miss Crockett, this is not your stage. This is my courtroom, and I will not entertain speeches or stall tactics. His voice cracked through the courtroom like a whip. The violation is on record. The fine is final. You want to argue? Take it to appeals if it gets that far. His tone wasn't legal, it was personal. Contempt, not concern. The ruling wasn't just punishment, it was a warning. Jasmine didn't move. She stood still, composed. But her mind was racing. Fast, focused. She knew this wasn't legal procedure anymore. This wasn't law. It was control. Judge Kane wasn't upholding justice, he was using the bench as a throne. His posture, his voice, his refusal to let her speak, it all revealed one truth: his mind was made up. Nothing Jasmine said would change that. But it wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about silencing her publicly. Making an example of her to send a message to everyone in the room. Lawyers, clerks, citizens in the gallery. Challenge me, and I'll crush you. Jasmine felt it. This wasn't about a code violation. It was about her presence, her confidence, her refusal to submit. Kane wasn't responding to the law. He was reacting to her strength and trying to strip it away, ruling by ruling. The prosecutor looked down. The court reporter's fingers froze. The room was no longer neutral, it was hostile. But in that silence, Jasmine saw the truth. Cain never intended to give her a fair hearing. He didn't come to listen. He came to dominate. Still, she didn't sit down. She didn't fold. Her voice dropped, but it grew stronger. "Then we proceed on the record," she said, locking eyes with him. "Every word, every step. If the law wouldn't protect her today, the truth would, and every injustice needs a witness." Then Jasmine made her move, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous to a man like Cain: clarity. She had watched long enough to know this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't haste. It was precision. She wasn't being fined for a code violation, she was being silenced for who she was. The courtroom had been arranged to send one message: you don't belong here. Cain had the gavel. But Jasmine had something heavier: precedent. She reached into her folder. The room shifted. The silence wasn't respectful, it was expectant, like the air before a fall. She placed her documents on the table like gears in a machine only she knew how to run. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady and sharp, "we're about to talk precedent. Because what you're doing has already been ruled on, and it didn't hold up." She held up the first page. Sullivan v. State of Illinois, 2017. A defendant was fined without evidence, no photos, no inspection reports, no affidavit, just an officer's word. It went to appeal. The court reversed the fine. She paused, then quoted, "Where there is no evidence, there is no enforcement. The integrity of due process demands more than assumption." Her tone didn't change. She wasn't performing. She was building pressure, law by law. She flipped to the next page. Henderson v. City of St. Petersburg, 2019. Fine issued by visual judgment alone. No timestamp, no physical proof. The city defended it as standard practice. The court disagreed. She quoted again. Again. Administrative authority does not exist in a vacuum. Fines must be based on verifiable fact, or they are void under constitutional review. Then she looked up. Slowly. Met Cain's eyes. That was when he shifted. Not much, just his jaw tightening, his shoulders stiffening. But Jasmine saw it. So did everyone else. The clerk started typing again. The prosecutor leaned forward, his hands clasped, no longer acting, just watching. Jasmine pressed forward, not louder, just sharper. "You fined me $15,000, she said. "No evidence. No argument. No hearing. Just your word." Her voice cut through the room. "That's not justice. That's authoritarianism in judicial robes." A ripple moved through the gallery. Attorneys exchanged glances. Was she really saying this? She was. She tapped her file again. These cases aren't theory. They're binding reminders of what this courtroom stands for. When a judge ignores process, silences defense, and rules without proof, they're not interpreting law. They're violating it. And I won't let that happen quietly. She stood firm. Eyes locked on Cain. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, but it echoed like thunder. "You can ignore my argument, but you can't erase precedent. And you will not rewrite the Constitution from behind that bench." At first, Cain didn't move. But Jasmine noticed. His jaw was clenched. His stare lost its edge. Judge Cain's confidence cracked. His fingers tapped nervously as Jasmine's precise legal arguments exposed the weakness of his ruling. She hadn't just defended herself, she'd cornered him with precedent he couldn't ignore. His sudden 15-minute recess wasn't reflection, it was retreat. He needed time to regroup, to find a way to regain control. Jasmine remained standing, calm and steady. The room had shifted. Doubt filled the air. Cain wasn't just facing a lawyer, he was facing accountability. When Cain returned, he wasn't alone. Judge Franklin Beal, a respected federal figure, entered behind him. His presence made it clear Cain had lost control. Cain claimed Beal was there for guidance, but everyone understood this was damage control. Beal's gaze landed on Jasmine, not with hostility but sharp scrutiny. She met it without fear. This was no longer a routine hearing. It was a challenge to the system itself. Finally, Beal spoke. "Ms. Crockett, please restate your constitutional argument." And with that, the courtroom braced for what came next. Judge Beal's request wasn't just procedural, it was a test. Jasmine knew it. She had walked into a hostile courtroom, dismantled its trap, and was now standing under federal scrutiny. One mistake and she could lose everything. But if she spoke with precision, she wouldn't just survive, she'd take control. So, calmly and without hesitation, she began. Yes, Your Honor. I'll start with due process failure supported by appellate precedent. Her voice signaled the shift. Kane had lost the room. Now, it leaned toward her. The courtroom quieted as Officer Paul Sanders took the stand. He was confident, even smug, relying on 20 years of unchallenged authority. But that would soon change. Jasmine questioned him carefully. He admitted he issued a $15,000 fine based solely on his judgment. No photos, no report, no witnesses, no evidence. Just his word. Jasmine stayed calm but firm. Do you believe your personal opinion without evidence overrides due process? Sanders said he trusted his judgment. Judgment, she replied, is not the same as proof. She turned to the judges. This isn't enforcement. It's assumption. This fine wasn't based on law, it was based on one man's feeling. The courtroom held its breath. When asked what evidence he'd present in court to support his decision, Sanders had nothing but his experience. Jasmine delivered the blow, so what you're calling a citation is really just your opinion in uniform. The silence that followed was intense. Every person in the room understood the state's case wasn't just weak, it was empty. Beale leaned back. Kane looked down, speechless. The prosecutor said nothing. Jasmine stepped back, not in retreat, but with purpose. The courtroom that had tried to silence her now sat stunned, forced to face the truth she had laid bare. Jasmine stood firm, her voice low but commanding. This isn't just about a fine. It's about people crushed by a system with no accountability. She lifted a page. Henry Locke, a veteran, lost his garage due to a missing checkbox. Got a letter of apology months too late. Teresa Vaughn, an electrician. A licensing change erased her catalog overnight. No explanation, no recourse. Gerald Pace, retired trucker, fined $10,000 for a fence 17 inches over the line. Then fined again for not tearing it down fast enough. The courtroom froze. Jasmine continued, what happened to them merely happened to me. No evidence, no hearing. Just one officer's opinion, stamped as law. She paused. Then said, what if I hadn't known the law? I would have paid, left ashamed. That's how injustice survives, quiet, buried in process. Her voice sharpened. Unchecked power is not justice. It's a weapon. And power that answers to no one doesn't protect, it hunts. Silence followed. Then Kane spoke stiffly, clinging to his authority. This court retains judicial discretion. It wasn't law, it was fear. And everyone knew it. The room went still as Jasmine stepped forward. Her voice was low but sharp. Judicial discretion is not judicial supremacy, she said, eyes locked on Kane. It's not a shield for error or a sword for bias. It must work within the law and never replace evidence, never replace truth. She turned to the room. A $15,000 fine with no documents, no proof, no witnesses, just a feeling. That's not discretion. That's lawlessness. Kane tensed, ready to respond. But before he could, Judge Beale leaned forward and spoke firm, final. I've heard enough. Judicial discretion does not override the Constitution. Personal opinion is not evidence. The courtroom froze. Beale continued, there is no supporting documentation, no witness, no evidence. This court cannot uphold a fine based on interpretation alone. To do so would be to set a precedent for unchecked power. Kane didn't speak. His hands folded, his eyes down. His authority had collapsed. After a long pause, he finally said, voice flat, this court finds insufficient evidence under Municipal Code 22F. The fine is vacated. The charge is dismissed. There was no cheer. Just silence. A system had merely crushed someone who dared to challenge it and lost. Jasmine didn't react. She stood calm, collected, as if the outcome was inevitable. Because to her it was. Not because the system worked, but because she forced it to. Kane, once untouchable, now sat quiet, outmatched and undone. The courtroom, once a tool of power, had just remembered what justice is meant to be. Judge Kane sat motionless, eyes fixed on the wood of his bench. The authority he once wielded had dissolved in the wake of Jasmine Crockett's unwavering demand for due process. Silence filled the courtroom, heavy with truth that could no longer be ignored, truth that even power couldn't silence. At last Kane looked up and met Jasmine's gaze. His voice, once booming, now barely a whisper. I underestimated you. The words weren't for the room, they were for her, an admission of misjudgment. Jasmine offered a small, knowing smile. You wouldn't be the first, sir, she replied, calm and composed. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. Authority no longer stood unchallenged. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just a legal win, it was the beginning of a new standard. Jasmine turned from the bench, each step echoing like a drumbeat of quiet revolution. Spectators watched in silence, understanding they'd just witnessed something greater than a verdict. The system itself being held to account. Outside, the sunlight pouring through the courthouse entrance felt symbolic clarity and hope pushing through old shadows. At the door, Jasmine paused for a final look. She saw Cain defeated and those who stood in silent aglockment with her. The law, once a weapon of control, had become a shield for justice again. She stepped into the light, not to cheers, but into the weight of a victory built on principle. It wasn't just her case, it was every case like hers. Her courage didn't just win justice today. It opened the door for others to follow. Something had shifted in that courtroom, subtle but irreversible. Judges who once ruled with unchecked authority might now think twice. Prosecutors, used to navigating a biased system, would face challenges they hadn't anticipated. And for everyday people, those who had lost homes, dignity, or hope, there was now a beacon in Jasmine's quiet defiance. She had proven that the law, when respected, could be a shield, not a weapon. That day, she didn't just fight for herself, she carved out space for justice to breathe again. Cain's final words, "The fine is hereby vacated, the charges dismissed," weren't a concession, they were an admission. His power had collapsed under the weight of her truth. In the weeks to come, legal scholars would cite the case. Law students would study it. Attorneys would reference it. But for Jasmine, it was never about headlines. It was about reclaiming something deeper, her voice, her dignity, and the promise that the courtroom is meant for all. As she stepped through the courthouse doors into the sunlight, there was no parade, no applause, just clarity. She had reminded the world of something essential: the law must serve the people, not the powerful. The system would push back, she knew that. But her steps that day left a mark. A reminder that unchecked power can be questioned, and when it is, justice has a chance. The precedent wasn't loud, but it was real. And it would echo long after the doors closed behind her. As the courthouse doors shut behind her, the echo of what Jasmine Crockett had done didn't fade, it spread. Her courage became a legacy, a reminder that no one is above the law. What began as a quiet act of defiance against a single judge sparked a ripple effect that reached far beyond that courtroom. Legal scholars debated it. Law students studied it. And ordinary citizens who had once felt powerless found new hope in her stand. In the weeks and months that followed, cities across the country began to examine their own practices. A $15,000 fine issued without evidence, once seen as an isolated mistake, revealed a pattern: thousands of citations handed down on little more than opinion. Communities realized these weren't errors, they were symptoms of a deeper problem. Jasmine's case ignited a national reckoning. Audits were launched. Fines were rescinded. Local governments were forced to admit that unchecked discretion had quietly harmed countless lives. And everywhere, people began to demand reform: clear evidence requirements, accountability, and a promise that no one would suffer injustice in silence again. Her case wasn't just about one woman and one ruling. It became a movement. Grassroots groups mobilized. Protesters filled town halls. Journalists uncovered more stories. Networks aired the voices of those silenced for too long: veterans, business owners, working families, each one echoing the same truth: power without oversight is dangerous. Jasmine didn't seek fame. She didn't need a spotlight. What she wanted, what she fought for, was fairness. And through her persistence, she gave the system a mirror and forced it to look. Because of her, new policies were written. Old rules were questioned. And people who had once been ignored were finally heard. This wasn't just a courtroom victory. It was a reckoning. A turning point. A reminder that real justice doesn't come from silence, it comes from standing up even when you stand alone. And now, thanks to her, no one has to. The fallout from the case was immediate. Stories poured in from across the country: citizens who had been fined without evidence, burdened with debts that destroyed their businesses, homes, and lives. The media uncovered thousands of unjust penalties issued over the past decade. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern. A broken system. and the public demanded change. What Jasmine Crockett achieved in that courtroom went far beyond one case. Her stand became a turning point in American justice. Legal scholars called it a landmark moment. Law schools began teaching her arguments. Policymakers cited her case to justify sweeping reforms. Conferences buzzed with discussions about transparency, accountability, and due process. Thanks to her, the rules began to change. Cities reviewed enforcement policies. Old fines were overturned. New safeguards were introduced. And for the first time, people felt heard, protected, empowered. Her legacy wasn't loud. It was lasting. It lived in the daily lives of those no longer afraid of a system they once couldn't challenge. It reminded the nation that unchecked power isn't justice, it's danger. But when that power is questioned and held accountable, it can become a force for good. Jasmine's courage sparked a movement. Her voice became a symbol for every citizen who had ever felt powerless. She proved that with the truth, with the law, and with unshakable resolve, even a single voice can make history. And though the work of justice is never done, her story stands as a reminder. Real change begins when someone refuses to stay silent. From this story, we don't just witness a courtroom drama, we witness a test of courage, intelligence, and unshakable conviction in the face of unchecked power. What made this hearing extraordinary wasn't the $15,000 fine, it was how one black woman stood up, confronted an entire system, and forced it to do what was right. This story delivers a powerful message. Justice doesn't arrive by itself, it must be demanded, fought for, and defended every single day. Because when power goes unchecked, it doesn't protect the people, it hunts them. We learn that truth, when wielded with reason and courage, can shake the very foundations of institutions. And in a world where silence has long been mistaken for safety, speaking out has become the bravest act of all. So what can we do today? Listen to those who've been wronged by the system. Learn, share, and speak up for those without a voice. Ask hard questions even when the answers come from robes, uniforms, or elevated benches. In the next 5 years, we can help build a society where justice is no longer a privilege but a right for all. Will racism and abuse of power be eradicated by 2040? Perhaps not. But if we start today, speaking up when we see wrong, standing firm when we see right, then by 2040, we will live in a stronger, kinder, and more just world. Jasmine's story is not an ending, it's a beginning. A spark for all who dare to rise and fight for justice. Disclaimer. The character Jasmine Crockett is a real person. She is a lawyer, former prosecutor, and currently a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. However, the entire story presented in this video is a work of fiction, created for the purpose of inspiration, and to reflect urgent social issues such as abuse of power, injustice, and racial discrimination. In reality, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was never fined $15,000, nor did she experience the specific events depicted in this script. However, her composure, strength, and unwavering commitment to justice have served as the primary inspiration for the character in this story. We do not intend to portray real events or attribute specific actions to any individual or organization. This is a creative work, symbolic, thought-provoking, and focused on social commentary rather than historical accuracy. Viewers are encouraged to engage with this content critically, with awareness, and to reflect on the deeper message it aims to convey.